Chapter 12. The And Principle. One of the most persistent errors in the reading of prophetic scripture is the assumption that God works through either / or rather than both / and. God does not reveal his purposes by eliminating one party and exalting another. He reveals a larger truth through the joining of both. This is the And Principle, and it may be the most important single concept in this entire study. Throughout every chapter we have traced the two houses, the two dispersions, the two families converging in America. The and has been present at every turn. The enemy consistently tries to reduce it to either / or. God consistently refuses to be reduced. Israel or the church? God said Israel and the nations, one olive tree, one root. Ephraim or Judah? God said Ephraim and Judah, two sticks, one hand. North or south? God said north and south, both gathered in Isaiah 11:11. The and cannot be collapsed, the fold cannot be narrowed, and once you see this principle, once your eyes adjust to the both / and pattern that runs through all of Scripture, you will never be able to read a prophetic, either / or without recognizing the hand that is always working to restore the and. Chapter 12. The And Principle. The And Principle is not a modern theological invention. It is the fingerprint that God has left on every major turning point of redemptive history. At creation, light and darkness separated, but both governed by the same hand. At the flood, judgment and mercy in the same ark. At the call of Abraham, one man called, and all families of the earth blessed through him. At Sinai, the severity of the law and the tenderness of God's heart expressed in the same covenant. In the Psalms, the lament and the praise woven into the same song. In the prophets, the warning and the promise spoken in the same breath. At the cross, justice and mercy met together. Righteousness and peace kissed each other. God did not choose between satisfying his holiness and extending his grace. The and found its fullest expression in the body of his Son. This is the pattern. Every time the enemy tries to force the binary, every time a false either or is presented as the only choice, the God of the end is working to show that his purposes are always larger than either option alone. The two houses are not an exception to this pattern. They are its most concentrated expression in prophetic history. Two families, one seed, one covenant, one destination. Let us look at what the and principle does to the either / or reductions that have distorted the reading of this book's subject for centuries. Jew or Gentile. This is the oldest of the reductions. Either Israel belongs to the covenant or the nations do. Either physical lineage qualifies or spiritual adoption does. But God said Jew and Gentile. One olive tree, one root. The branches are grafted into the same stalk, not replacing the natural branches, not competing with them, joined to them. Africa or Israel. Either the peoples of Africa are a separate story from the covenant narrative, or the covenant narrative is entirely African. But God said, Africa and Israel. Judah's dispersed remnant was preserved in the African diaspora. Both dimensions of that statement are true at the same time. North or South dispersion. Either the northern tribe's story is the whole story, or the southern tribe's story is. But God said, North and South. Isaiah 11:11 gathers them from Assyria and from Egypt and Cush. Both corridors, both streams, both families. Physical or spiritual regathering. Either the prophecies about Israel's regathering are literal and geographic, or they are spiritual metaphors about the church. But God said, physical and spiritual. The reconciliation regathering is both a genuine geographic convergence of covenant peoples in American soil and a spiritual awakening that transforms the way both houses see themselves and each other. The and continues across every dimension of this framework. Israel or the nations? Either God's redemptive purpose is for Israel or it is for the Gentile world. But God said, Israel and the nations. Romans chapter 11, the grafted branches, the wild olive joined to the cultivated root, not one replacing the other, both needed for the full expression of the covenant. Justice or mercy. Either God's holiness demands judgment or his love extends forgiveness. But God said, justice and mercy. The cross is the only place in human history where perfect justice and perfect mercy were satisfied simultaneously, and neither was compromised. Ephraim or Judah. Either the northern house carries the covenant, or the southern house does. Either the Celtic and Anglo-Saxon peoples are the Israel of God, or the African diaspora is. But God said, Ephraim and Judah. Two sticks, one hand. Ezekiel 37. Not one absorbing the other. Britain or America. Either England and the British Commonwealth is Manasseh, or America is Ephraim. But of course, both. Manasseh and Ephraim, the elder brother and the younger, one family, same father, same birthright, different destinies that together form the complete prophetic picture. And the summary of the entire framework, Shem or Japheth or Ham? No. God said, Shem and Japheth and Ham, heart and mind and body, all three sons at the Father's table, all three streams needed, no one eliminated, no one sufficient alone. The kingdom requires all three. The and continues across every dimension of this framework. The and principle is not theological compromise. This must be said clearly because the enemy's second move, after failing to establish the either/or, is to suggest that the and requires the erasure of all distinctions. The distinctions in this book are precise. Ephraim is not Judah. The northern dispersion is not the southern dispersion. The suffering of each house followed a different corridor. The genetic and cultural markers are different. The prophetic texts that address each house are distinct. These distinctions matter. We did not spend 9 chapters tracing them with care, only to collapse them now into a vague, undifferentiated Israel. But the distinctions exist in service of the and, not in place of it. The reason we trace the two dispersions so carefully is so that we can recognize the miracle of their convergence. You cannot marvel at the convergence of two rivers if you cannot first identify that there were two rivers. The precision of the distinction is what makes the and so staggering. The reason we name the suffering of each house is so that we can hold together, without collapsing into false equivalence, the truth that both houses suffered and both houses carry the same covenant seed and both houses are needed for the OneFold to be complete. Distinction without the and produces exclusivism, and without distinction produces false equivalence. The and principle holds both together: precise distinctions, unified purpose, one fold, one shepherd. Jesus himself embodied the and principle at the deepest level, and his life is the most powerful argument for why the and cannot be reduced. Fully God and fully man, not God pretending to be human, not a human elevated to divine status. Two complete natures, one person, held together by the power of an incarnation that the greatest theological minds of every century have not been able to fully explain, because the and defies reduction. The Lion of Judah and the Lamb who was slain, the King who rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, the one who could call 12 legions of angels and chose instead to say, "Not my will but thine." He fulfilled the law and inaugurated grace. He did not set aside the requirements of the law in order to extend grace. He satisfied every requirement of the law perfectly, so that grace could be extended without compromising a single letter of what the law demanded. He was the king and the servant, the one before whom every knee will bow, who washed the feet of the men who would abandon him before morning. When the religious establishment drew circles of exclusion, Jesus drew a larger circle. This is not a denial of Israel's covenantal priority. It is the fulfillment of what that covenant was always for. In Abraham shall all the families of the earth be blessed. All, not some, not the favored, all. The and is not theological weakness. It is the most powerful force in the universe. The cross, where justice and mercy met, is the proof. The and principle does not end in abstract theology. It ends in a flock. Other sheep I have which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice. And there will be one flock and one shepherd. One flock, not the elimination of distinction, the reconciliation of it. The shepherd does not bring the other sheep into the fold by telling them their distinctiveness does not matter. He brings them by calling them each by name, each in their own language, each recognizing his voice in the particular frequency of their own history. Ephraim hears the shepherd's voice in the Celtic music of the Highlands, in the Presbyterian covenant theology of the Scots-Irish, in the long memory of a people who carried something sacred without knowing fully what it was. Judah hears the shepherd's voice in the spirituals that came out of the Middle Passage, in the preaching tradition that shook continents, in the blues and the gospel, and the cry that has been rising from American soil for 4 centuries. Both voices, both traditions, both houses, both hearing the same shepherd calling from the same direction, and there will be one flock, the and made visible, the two sticks held in one hand, the one fold that requires both families to be complete. This is where all of it was always going. Not the triumph of one house over another, the reconciliation of both, in the presence of the shepherd who called them both, preserved them both, and is gathering them both home. Chapter 12 has given us the and principle, the single concept that may be the most important in this entire study. God's signature throughout redemptive history is not the exclusion of one in the elevation of another. It is the revelation of a larger truth through the joining of both, Jew and Gentile, North and South, Ephraim and Judah, Shem and Ham and Japheth, justice and mercy, the law and grace, the king and the servant. And at the center of it all, the cross, where the and was sealed, where justice kissed mercy, where God did not choose between his holiness and his love, and proved that he never has to. The two-house framework, traced through 10 chapters and established through the and principle of chapters 11 and 12, now reaches its final destination. In chapter 13, the last chapter before the conclusion, we will look at the reconciliation regathering itself, what it means, what it looks like, what is required of both families to step into the recognition that God has been preparing since the division of 930 BC. One seed, two families, one and that will not be reduced, one shepherd who is calling, the fold is forming, come near,